Remember to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Okay, here goes. I still can't quite believe it even now, weeks later. It all started so innocently, just a dinner party. Honestly, Mark, my husband of 22 years had been working late a lot lately. He's a structural engineer, and apparently there was some big bridge project on the line, lots of pressure. So when he finally suggested having dinner with one of his colleagues, I was thrilled. A chance to connect, maybe hear some stories from his work life, feel like we were still us. His colleague was named Daniel. Mark had mentioned him before, said he was brilliant, a bit of a workaholic, but a good guy. I pictured someone young, fresh out of college, eager to impress. What walked through our door that Friday evening was not quite that. Daniel was probably in his mid-50s, maybe a little older. He had kind eyes framed by laugh lines and a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had a certain gravitas, an air of quiet competence and understanding. He carried himself with a comfortable ease, a kind of understated confidence that I found surprisingly attractive. I know, I'm happily married, or at least I was. We live in a rambling old Victorian in upstate New York, all creaky floorboards and cozy nooks. I love to cook, so I'd gone all out. Roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, garlic mashed potatoes, roasted asparagus. The kind of meal that says, "Welcome, come in, relax." The dining room was lit by candlelight, the air filled with the scent of roasting chicken and the soft murmur of conversation. It felt intimate, maybe too intimate. Mark dove straight into shop talk, the bridge project, stresses and strains, bureaucratic red tape. I tried to look interested, nodding occasionally, but honestly, my mind started to drift. Daniel, however, was engaged. He and Mark bounced ideas off each other, their voices rising and falling with the intensity of the discussion. I felt like an outsider, a spectator to a game I didn't understand. Then something shifted. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but Daniel turned to me and asked, "So Sarah, what do you do?" It was such a simple question, but the way he asked it, he wasn't just being polite. He seemed genuinely interested. I told him about my pottery. I've been a potter for about 15 years, selling my work at local craft fairs and online. I described the feel of the clay in my hands, the satisfaction of shaping something beautiful and functional from a lump of earth. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. "That sounds incredibly fulfilling," he said, his voice low and warm. "There's something so primal about working with your hands, creating something tangible." And suddenly we weren't talking about pottery anymore. We were talking about passion, about creativity, about the things that make life worth living. We talked about feeling stuck, about the fear of growing stagnant, about the longing for something more. He spoke of the pressures of his job, the constant deadlines, the feeling of being a cog in a machine. I spoke of the quiet desperation that sometimes crept in, the feeling that I was just going through the motions. The conversation flowed effortlessly, like a river finding its natural course. We discovered a shared love of poetry, a fascination with history, a deep appreciation for the beauty of the natural world. Mark, oblivious, was still dissecting the bridge's load-bearing capacity. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room began to thicken. Not a bad tension. Not exactly. More like a magnetic pull. I found myself drawn to Daniel, to his intelligence, his sensitivity, his quiet strength. I caught him looking at me too, his eyes filled with a kind of recognition. It was unsettling, exhilarating, and deeply, deeply inappropriate. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee. Mark, finally sensing the shift in the atmosphere, suggested a game of chess. Daniel readily agreed. I watched them play, sipping my coffee, the silence broken only by the click of the pieces and the occasional grunt of concentration. But my mind wasn't on the game. My mind was on Daniel, on the way he held the chess pieces, his fingers long and elegant, on the way his brow furrowed in concentration, on the way he occasionally glanced at me, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Finally, around 11, Daniel stood up to leave. He shook Mark's hand, thanking him for the evening. Then he turned to me. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "I really enjoyed our conversation." "Me too, Daniel," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm and firm. "Perhaps," he said, his eyes meeting mine, "we could continue it sometime." My heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my cheeks flushed. He smiled a knowing smile, and then he was gone. The door closed behind him, and suddenly the silence in the house was deafening. I turned to Mark, who was already clearing the coffee cups. He seemed oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken my world. "He's a good guy, Daniel," Mark said, yawning. "Really knows his stuff." I managed a weak smile. "Yes," I said. "He seems like it." I went to bed that night, my mind racing. What had just happened? Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into a simple dinner conversation? But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something had changed, and I had a feeling that my life would never be quite the same again. The next few days were strange. I found myself constantly replaying the dinner in my head, dissecting every word, every glance, every fleeting touch. Was I losing my mind? Was this some kind of midlife crisis manifesting itself in the form of a slightly older, incredibly intelligent structural engineer? I tried to talk to Mark, but I didn't know how to broach the subject. How could I tell him that I had a connection with his colleague, a connection that felt deeper and more meaningful than anything I'd felt in years? And how could I do it without hurting him, without making him feel like I was disloyal? So I said nothing. I buried myself in my work, throwing myself into my pottery with a frantic energy. I made vases, bowls, mugs, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied. But even as I shaped the clay, I couldn't shake the image of Daniel's eyes, the sound of his voice, the feeling of his hand in mine. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello, Sarah." The voice was low and familiar. My heart skipped a beat. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just working. "I was wondering," he said, a slight pause in his voice, "if you might be free for lunch sometime this week." My breath caught in my throat. "Lunch?" I repeated stupidly. "Yes," he chuckled softly. "Just a casual lunch. No bridge designs or load-bearing capacities involved." I hesitated again. This was insane. I shouldn't be doing this. I was married. But the thought of seeing him again, of continuing our conversation, was too tempting to resist. "I think I could manage that," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Great," he said. "How about tomorrow?" "There's a little bistro downtown that I like, around noon." "That sounds perfect," I replied. We hung up, and I stood there for a moment, my hand still clutching the phone. What had I just done? I had just agreed to have lunch with my husband's colleague, a man who made my heart race and my palms sweat. This was going to be a disaster. But deep down, a part of me, a part that had been dormant for years, was excited, terrified, but excited. The next day I spent hours agonizing over what to wear. I finally settled on a simple blue dress that I knew was flattering without being too revealing. I put on a little makeup, just enough to look presentable. I wanted to look good, but not like I was trying too hard. God, I felt like a teenager again. I arrived at the bistro a few minutes early, my stomach churning with nerves. It was a charming little place with checkered tablecloths and wrought-iron chairs. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the bustling scene. I spotted Daniel sitting at a table in the corner reading a book. He looked up as I approached, and a warm smile spread across his face. "Sarah," he said, standing up to greet me. "You look lovely." I blushed. "Thank you," I mumbled. You look like you." He chuckled. "I hope that's a good thing." We sat down and the waitress took our orders. We both ordered salads, trying to be healthy. The silence was a little awkward at first, but Daniel quickly put me at ease. He asked me about my pottery, about my family, about my dreams. He listened intently, offering insightful comments and asking probing questions. He made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. We talked for hours, losing track of time. We talked about everything and nothing. We laughed, we shared stories, we debated ideas. I felt like I had known him my whole life. And then he said something that completely floored me. "You know," he said, leaning forward, his eyes meeting mine, "I feel like I've known you forever too. Like we're kindred spirits. Kindred spirits." The words hung in the air between us, charged with unspoken meaning. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was electric. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I know this is probably inappropriate, and I don't want to overstep, but I can't deny the connection I feel with you. It's something I've never experienced before." Tears welled up in my eyes. I had been waiting to hear those words or something like them, and now that they were here, I was overwhelmed. "I feel it too, Daniel," I whispered. "I've been trying to ignore it, to pretend it's not there, but it's no use." He squeezed my hand. "What do we do about it?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I couldn't walk away from this. I couldn't ignore the undeniable pull that drew me to him. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "But I know I can't just pretend it doesn't exist." He nodded. "Me neither," he said. We sat there in silence for a moment, our hands clasped together, the weight of our unspoken feelings pressing down on us. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only us, two kindred spirits who had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. The waitress brought our check, breaking the spell. We paid and walked out of the bistro. The sunlight felt brighter, the air felt fresher. As we stood on the sidewalk, Daniel turned to me. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his eyes pleading. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Please." He smiled a slow, tender smile. "I'll call you," he said, and then he walked away. I stood there for a long time watching him disappear into the crowd. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to leap into the unknown. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew I had to find out. The phone call came that evening. I was helping Mark clear up after dinner, another silent affair punctuated only by the clatter of dishes and the occasional forced pleasantry. I saw Daniel's number flash on the screen, and my heart did a ridiculous little flutter. I feigned a sudden need to check on something in the garden and slipped outside, phone pressed to my ear. "Sarah," his voice was like warm honey, instantly calming my frayed nerves. "Hi, Daniel. I was wondering if you were free this weekend." He sounded hesitant, almost nervous. It was strangely endearing. "Possibly," I said, pleading. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a small art gallery opening in Hudson on Saturday," he said. "I know you mentioned your pottery and I thought you might enjoy it. It's nothing fancy, just local artists, but it sounds lovely." "I'd love to go," I said, interrupting him. He sounded genuinely surprised and pleased. "That's wonderful." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Hudson on Saturday afternoon. As I hung up, I felt a surge of guilt. Deceiving Mark felt awful, but the thought of spending time with Daniel, exploring this connection, was too alluring to resist. I was walking a tightrope, and I knew it. The next 2 days crawled by. Mark was preoccupied with the bridge project, working late and barely noticing my increasing agitation. I told him I was planning a girls' weekend with some friends from college, a flimsy lie that he accepted without question. I packed a small bag, choosing my clothes with agonizing care, wanting to look good for Daniel without appearing too contrived. Saturday arrived, crisp and sunny. I drove to Hudson, a charming town on the Hudson River filled with antique shops and art galleries. I found the coffee shop easily and spotted Daniel waiting outside, leaning against the brick wall. He looked even more handsome than I remembered, dressed in a casual blazer and jeans. "Sarah," he said, his face lighting up when he saw me. You made it. Of course, I said, smiling. Wouldn't miss it. We went inside, ordered coffee, and then strolled through the town hand in hand. The air was filled with the scent of autumn leaves and the sounds of laughter and conversation. We explored the antique shops, admiring the vintage furniture and quirky artifacts. We talked about art, about literature, about life. I felt completely at ease, completely myself. The art gallery was small and unassuming but filled with interesting pieces. We admired the paintings, the sculptures, the photographs. Daniel seemed genuinely interested in my opinion, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to my responses. Then we came across a small display of pottery. My breath caught in my throat. The pieces were beautiful, elegant, and clearly made with love. These are stunning, Daniel said, his voice filled with admiration. Do you know the artist? I hesitated for a moment, then said, Yes, I do. Is it a friend of yours? He asked. In a way, I said. It's me. His eyes widened in surprise. You made these? I nodded, feeling a flush of pride. Yes, I've been a potter for about 15 years. He stared at the pottery for a long moment, then turned to me, his eyes filled with awe. Sarah, he said, these are incredible. You're so talented. His praise was like a balm to my soul. Mark had always been supportive of my pottery, but he had never really understood it. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to see right into my heart, to appreciate the passion and the creativity that drove me. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring Hudson, our connection deepening with every shared glance, every whispered word. As the sun began to set, we found ourselves standing on the banks of the Hudson River, watching the boats glide by. I'm having a wonderful time, Sarah, Daniel said, turning to me. I haven't felt this alive in years. Me neither, Daniel, I said. This is special. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Then he leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft, tentative kiss, but it sent a jolt of electricity through my body. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a connection that ran deeper than words. I kissed him back, my heart pounding in my chest. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only us, two souls drawn together by an irresistible force. We broke apart, breathless and flushed. I shouldn't have done that, Daniel said, his voice filled with regret. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said, reaching out and touching his face. I wanted you too. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of desire and trepidation. Where do we go from here, Sarah? He asked. I didn't have an answer. I knew that what we were doing was wrong, that it could potentially destroy my marriage, but I also knew that I couldn't walk away from Daniel. He made me feel seen, heard, and understood in a way that Mark never had. I don't know, I said, my voice trembling. But I know I can't just pretend this isn't happening. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Me neither, he said. We stood there for a long time, our hands clasped together, the weight of our choices pressing down on us. The sun had set, and the sky was ablaze with colour. The world was beautiful, but our situation was complicated, messy, and potentially devastating. I knew that I was at a crossroads, that I had to make a decision that would change my life forever. But I didn't know what that decision would be. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced, replaying the kiss, Daniel's words, the overwhelming feeling of connection, infatuation, lust. Maybe all three stirred together into a potent cocktail of emotions. I knew I couldn't keep this charade up for long. The guilt was eating me alive. When I walked in the door, Mark was sitting in the living room reading a book. He looked up, a tired smile on his face. Hey, he said, how was the girls' weekend? The question hung in the air, heavy with irony. It was fine, I said, trying to sound casual. We did a lot of catching up. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine and tried to calm my racing nerves. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, I felt a profound sense of loneliness. We were physically close but emotionally miles apart. I knew I had to tell him the truth, but I didn't know how. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The crisp autumn air helped clear my head. As I walked, I realized that I couldn't continue living a lie. I owed it to Mark and to myself, to be honest. I went back home, made breakfast, and waited for Mark to wake up. When he came downstairs, I asked him to sit down. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." He looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. About the dinner with Daniel, about the connection I felt with him, about the lunch, about the art gallery, about the kiss. I spared no details, laying bare my soul in all its messy, confused glory. He listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. When I finished, he just sat there, staring at the floor, his eyes filled with pain and disbelief. "How could you do this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After all these years?" "I don't know," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," he said, his voice rising. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage." I didn't argue. I knew he was right. I had betrayed him. We talked for hours, arguing, crying, and trying to make sense of what had happened. Mark was understandably angry and hurt, but he also seemed confused. He couldn't understand why I would risk everything for someone I had only just met. I tried to explain it to him, to describe the feeling of connection, the feeling of being seen and understood. But I knew that he couldn't truly understand. He had never experienced anything like it. In the end, we agreed to separate. It was the hardest decision of my life, but we both knew that we couldn't continue living together under these circumstances. The trust was broken, the damage irreparable. Mark moved out a few days later. The house felt empty and silent without him. I spent the next few weeks in a haze of grief and regret. I missed him terribly, but I also knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I called Daniel and told him what had happened. He was shocked and saddened by the news. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he said. "I never wanted to cause you any pain." "It's not your fault, Daniel," I said. "We both made choices." We talked for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. We both knew that a relationship between us would be complicated, fraught with challenges. But we also knew that we couldn't ignore the connection we felt. We decided to take things slowly, to get to know each other better, to see if we could build a relationship based on honesty and respect. We went on dates, we talked for hours, we shared our dreams and fears. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of regret, moments when I wondered if I had made the right decision. But there were also moments of joy, moments of connection, moments when I felt truly alive. A year later, Daniel and I are still together. We've built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and understanding. It's not the life I imagined for myself, but it's a life that feels authentic and true. Mark and I are still in touch. We've managed to forge a friendship, albeit a fragile one. He's even remarried and seems happy. I'm happy for him. Looking back, I can see that my dinner with Daniel was a turning point in my life. It was a catalyst that forced me to confront my own dissatisfaction, to examine my priorities, and to make choices that ultimately led me to a more fulfilling path. It wasn't easy. It was painful, messy, and complicated. But it was also necessary. I had to break free from the comfortable but stagnant patterns of my old life in order to embrace a new one. A life filled with passion, purpose, and authentic connection. And sometimes, the most unexpected turns lead us to the most beautiful destinations. It just takes the courage to follow.